I'm Laura, 35, a woman, and I just found out my fiance's idea of a package deal was nearly 6 figures of hidden debt, so I hired a lawyer to redefine the terms of our merger. It sounds cold when I say it like that, like a corporate takeover instead of the end of a love story. But love, I've learned, can't be blind. It has to have its eyes wide open, especially when it comes to the balance sheet of a shared life. Before the lawyer, before the sickening lurch in my stomach that came with uncovering the truth, there was just Caleb. And Caleb was, for a long time, the most wonderful thing in my life. We met 3 years ago at a friend's rooftop party on a warm summer evening. I was there because my college roommate, Sarah, insisted I needed to get out from behind my spreadsheets. I'm a financial analyst, a profession that rewards caution, planning, and a healthy respect for numbers. My life was a testament to that philosophy. I owned my condo, my car was paid off, and my retirement accounts were growing at a steady, satisfying pace. My life was orderly. And then Caleb walked over, handed me a drink, and turned my orderly world upside down. He was a freelance graphic designer, and he lived his life in vibrant, unpredictable colors while I lived mine in the reassuring black and white of financial statements. He was charming, with an easy laugh and a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He talked about art, music, and his dream of one day opening a small design studio that would only work with nonprofits and local artists. He was driven by passion, not by profit margins. I was captivated. Our differences were apparent from the start, but in the beginning they felt complementary, not conflicting. He would coax me out of my shell, convincing me to take spontaneous weekend trips to little coastal towns. I would gently remind him to file his quarterly taxes, helping him organize a shoebox full of receipts he'd affectionately dubbed his creative accounting system. I saw his financial habits not as flaws, but as charming quirks. They were part of his artistic temperament, the very thing that made him so different from the predictable, buttoned-up men I'd dated before. I remember one specific instance, about 6 months into our relationship. He'd had a fantastic month landing a big project with a new tech startup. To celebrate, he surprised me with a weekend trip to a boutique hotel in the wine country. It was incredibly romantic, a beautiful suite, extravagant dinners, a private tour of a vineyard. I was swept off my feet. It was only on the drive home, when I casually asked how he managed to book it all on such short notice, that he patted his wallet and said, "Thank goodness for the magic of plastic." He said it with a wink, as if a credit card was a magic wand instead of a high-interest loan. A part of my brain, the financial analyst part, did a quick, worried calculation, but I pushed it down. I told myself he deserved to celebrate his success. He worked hard, even if his income was less predictable than mine. I was in love, and I chose to see it as generosity, as a man who wasn't afraid to live in the moment. Another time, a few months later, he showed up at my door with a brand new, top-of-the-line professional camera, a piece of equipment that cost thousands of dollars. His own freelance work had been slow for a couple of weeks, and I knew for a fact he'd been worried about making rent. "Caleb, this is amazing, but how?" I asked, my voice a mixture of awe and concern. "I had to get it, Laura," he said, his eyes shining with excitement. "It's an investment in my future. You have to spend money to make money, right?" That phrase, "you have to spend money to make money," would become a common refrain. He used it to justify new software, a more powerful laptop, expensive online courses. In his mind, these weren't expenses, they were essential tools for his craft. My mind, however, categorized them under discretionary spending and flagged them with a silent, internal question mark. I wasn't a miser, I enjoyed life, but I enjoyed it on a budget. I saved for big purchases, I planned for vacations. I understood the difference between an investment and an indulgence. For Caleb, that line was blurry, almost non-existent. Of course, we talked about his financial situation. Early on, he told me he had student loan debt from his art school degree. He was upfront about it, and I appreciated his honesty. "It's around 40,000, he told me one evening as we were making dinner in my kitchen. "It feels like this giant weight, you know, I just try not to think about it." "We can figure it out," I said, putting my hand on his arm. "When the time comes, we can make a plan together." And I meant it. In my mind, his student debt was a known quantity. a fixed number we could tackle as a team once we were married. I had already started running the numbers in my Eid, calculating how quickly we could pay it off if we were aggressive, if we combined our incomes and focused our efforts. I saw it as our first big project as a married couple, a financial mountain we could climb and conquer together. It never once occurred to me that the mountain I was seeing was merely a foothill, and the true summit was hidden in a thick, deliberate fog. When he proposed a year ago on the anniversary of the night we met, on that same rooftop, I didn't hesitate. I said yes because I loved the man who made me laugh, who encouraged me to be more spontaneous, who saw the world in a way I never could. I believed our differences made us stronger. I was the steady anchor, he was the soaring kite. Together, I thought we were perfectly balanced. I was about to find out in the harshest way possible that our entire foundation was built on a lie. And the kite I thought I was holding onto was about to come crashing down, threatening to pull me with it into a sea of debt I never knew existed. The months following our engagement were a blur of joyful planning, or at least they were supposed to be. For me, joy is intertwined with planning. The two are inseparable. Devising a strategy, creating a timeline, and building a budget are how I express excitement. It's how I take a vague, wonderful idea like our wedding and make it real. For Caleb, however, the details were just tedious obstacles on the path to the party. We started with the big things: the venue, the guest list, the caterer. I created a master spreadsheet, color-coded and complete with columns for estimated cost, actual cost, and vendor contact info. I showed it to Caleb one Sunday afternoon, beaming with pride. He glanced at the laptop screen, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Wow, Laura, you've really excelled at this." He chuckled at his own pun. "It looks like a business plan." "It is a business plan in a way," I said, my enthusiasm undimmed. "The business of starting our life together on the right foot. I want it to be perfect, but I also don't want us to start our marriage in a huge hole." "The hole, don't be so dramatic. It's a wedding, not a corporate merger," he said, leaning over to close the laptop. "Let's not suck the romance out of it, okay? We'll figure out the money stuff. It always works out." Always works out, that was another one of his signature phrases. For him, it was a statement of faith in the universe. For me, a financial analyst, it was the verbal equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. Things didn't just work out. People made them work out through planning, discipline, and foresight. Still, I let it slide. This was about the wedding, a one-time expense. I tightened the budget in my head, making a mental note to earmark more of my own savings to cover any potential overages. I could handle that. It was the bigger picture I was concerned with, the financial landscape of our entire future. The conversation I had been planning for weeks finally happened a month later. We had just put down a deposit on a beautiful old barn venue in the countryside. The reality of the expense, a solid five-figure number, seemed to finally have landed on Caleb. He was quiet on the drive home, and I decided to seize the opportunity. That evening, I sat him down at the dining table. I didn't bring out the laptop this time. I had learned my lesson. I started gently. "I'm so excited about the venue," I began. "It's going to be so beautiful." And it got me thinking about all the other exciting things in our future, buying a house, maybe in a few years, all of it. He smiled, his good mood returning. "Me too, I can already picture it." "Me too," I said, taking his hand. "And to make all that happen, I think it would be a really good idea for us to sit down and make a real unified budget. A Team Laura and Caleb financial plan." His smile tightened. "Laura, we just spent all day talking about wedding expenses. Can we not talk about money for 5 minutes?" "This isn't about the wedding, honey. This is about everything after. It's about our life," I pressed, trying to keep my tone light and positive. "I was thinking about your student loans, for example. If we really hit them hard from the moment we're married, we could probably pay them off in 3 or 4 years. Imagine how freeing that would be." I expected him to be relieved, to see this as the supportive, team-oriented gesture it was. I was offering my financial expertise, my higher, more stable income as a tool to unburden him. I was offering to take on his weight as my own. Instead, he pulled his hand away. He stood up and walked over to the window, his back to me. The silence in the room grew heavy. "What's wrong?" I asked softly. He turned around and his expression wasn't one of gratitude. It was one of irritation, of a deep, simmering defensiveness. His jaw was set and his eyes were hard. "What's wrong?" he said, his voice flat. "Is that you're trying to turn our marriage into one of your financial projects? You want to manage me? You want to put my life into one of your little color-coded spreadsheets?" I was stunned. "That's not it at all. I'm trying to help us. I love you and I want us to have a secure future. That means facing things like debt head-on together." "I'm not facing things," he shot back, his voice rising. "I face my bills every month, Laura. I get by. I've been getting by my whole life without charts and projections." "Getting by isn't the same as getting ahead," I argued, my own frustration starting to bubble up. "I want us to get ahead, to build something. We can't do that if we're ignoring a $40,000 problem." He let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. It was a sound of pure exasperation. He walked back toward the table, leaning his hands on it and looking down at me. The casual, easygoing man I loved was gone, replaced by a cold, defensive stranger. Then he said the words that would echo in my mind for weeks, the words that cracked the very foundation of my trust in him. "Laura, relax," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You knew I had debt when you met me. It's part of the package. You don't get the fun, creative guy without the art school loans. That's the deal." He delivered the lines as if they were an unassailable truth, a final verdict. He smiled, a tight, dismissive little smirk, as if he had just brilliantly checkmated me in a game I didn't even know we were playing. I just stared at him, speechless. The air left my lungs. It wasn't just the words, it was the entire sentiment behind them, the entitlement, the utter lack of partnership. He wasn't saying, "This is our problem to solve." He was saying, "This is my problem, and your price of admission is to accept it without complaint." "A part of the package." The phrase was so transactional, so detached. He had taken our future, our partnership, and reduced it to a commercial exchange. I was buying a product and his debt was a feature, not a bug. It implied that any attempt on my part to address it, to improve our situation, was a violation of the terms of sale. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The loving, trusting fiancée receded and the financial analyst took her place. An analyst's job is to scrutinize the details, to read the fine print, to assess risk. And the man standing in front of me had just revealed himself to be a far riskier asset than I had ever imagined. My heart felt a cold dread, a sudden, terrifying premonition that the package he was talking about contained far more than he had ever declared. The package comment hung in the air between us for days, a toxic, invisible cloud. We moved around each other with a forced, fragile politeness. Caleb seemed to believe he had won the argument, that he had successfully shut down my unromantic talk of budgets and debts. He acted as if everything was back to normal, occasionally trying to pull me into a hug or make a joke, but I couldn't respond authentically. Every time he touched me, I felt a deep, chilling recoil. The trust I'd had in him, once a solid and unshakable pillar, had been fractured. Now it was riddled with hairline cracks, and I couldn't stop poking at them. His words replayed in my mind on a loop. "It's part of the package." The phrase haunted me while I was at work, staring blankly at market trend analyses. It kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling in the dark. A package, what else was in it? A good analyst never takes a summary at face value. They always dig deeper. They verify the data. And for the first time in our relationship, I felt an urgent, sickening need to verify Caleb. The opportunity came a week later. It was a Wednesday evening, and Caleb was out at a networking event for local designers. I was working from home, trying to finish a quarterly report. Our mail was still delivered separately to our respective apartments, but he often had packages from clients or online orders sent to my condo since I was home more often and the doorman could accept them. A small stack of his mail sat on the entryway table where I'd left it for him. As I walked past it to get a glass of water, a particular envelope caught my eye. It wasn't a standard letter-sized envelope. It was larger, thicker, and had a prominent, bold logo in the corner for a credit card company I didn't recognize, one known for its high annual fees and prestige branding. It was addressed to Caleb, but it was the return address that made my heart start to beat faster. It wasn't their standard corporate P.O. box. It had a specific department listed: delinquency and collections. My blood ran cold. Delinquency, collections. These weren't words associated with someone who was getting by. These were words associated with financial distress. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the envelope. My mind was at war with Itzel. F the loving fiancé, what was left of her, screamed at me to put it down, to trust him, to respect his privacy. To open his mail would be an unforgivable breach. But the analyst, the part of me now fueled by a cold, growing suspicion, was louder. Risk assessment, it whispered. You have a fiduciary duty to your own future. The man who lives under your roof and plans to share your life is a risk that must be assessed. My hands were trembling as I picked up the envelope. I told myself I would just look, but I knew that was a lie. With a deep breath that felt more like a gasp, I carefully tore open the flap. My guilt was immediately overwhelmed by a wave of nauseating dread as I unfolded the papers inside. It was a credit card statement, but it was unlike any I had ever seen. The amount due was horrifying enough, well over $10,000, but it was the minimum payment due that made me feel faint. It was nearly $500, and next to it in bright red letters were the words, "Account 90 plus days past due. Pay immediately to avoid further action." My eyes scanned the list of charges, and the story they told was of a life I didn't recognize. There were $1,000 charges at high-end electronics stores, extravagant dinners at restaurants I'd never even heard of with tabs running into the hundreds of dollars, presumably for him and his friends, cash advances. A charge for a weekend hotel stay in the city from a month ago, a weekend he told me he spent at home working on a project. My breath hitched, my hands shook so hard the papers rattled. This wasn't just a credit card, it was a secret life. Driven by a desperate, horrifying need to know the full truth, I went to his laptop, which was sitting on the corner of my desk. He often used it here when he stayed over. He trusted me implicitly, never bothering to log out of his accounts. The irony was a bitter pill. I opened his web browser. His email was already logged in. With a heart pounding against my ribs, I typed credit card into the search bar. The results flooded the screen. There weren't one or two, there were confirmations and statements from 5 different major credit card companies. One by one, I clicked on them, my sense of dread growing with each one. Some he was paying the minimum on. Others, like the one from the envelope, were deep in delinquency. I opened a new spreadsheet on my own computer. The irony was not lost on me. He hated my spreadsheets, but only a spreadsheet could bring order to this chaos. I began to list them out, the name of the creditor, the outstanding balance, the interest rate. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my analyst brain taking over, finding a strange, cold comfort in the methodical work of cataloging my own heartbreak. Card 1, $12,500. Interest rate, 24.99%. Card 2, $8,700. Interest rate, 22.5%. Card 3, $15,200. Interest rate, 28.1%. Card 4, a store card for an electronics boutique, $6,400. Interest rate, 29.99%. Card 5, a gas card he'd once told me was just for emergencies, $2,100. I kept adding, my horror growing. There were also emails from online lenders confirming personal loans I knew nothing about. One was for $10,000 taken out 8 months ago. Another was for $5,000. He had been borrowing money to pay for his lifestyle, to pay other bills, to keep the whole precarious structure from collapsing. He was drowning. Finally, I had all the numbers. I created a final cell in the spreadsheet and entered the formula. I added the credit card balances, the personal loans, and then, for the sake of completeness, the $40,000 in student loans he had told me about. I held my breath and pressed enter. The number that appeared on the screen felt like a physical punch to the gut. It shimmered there, a digital testament to his deception. $98,900. Almost $100,000. I pushed my chair back from the desk so hard it scraped against the floor. I felt like I was going to be sick. The room started to spin. It wasn't just the amount, it was the scale of the lie. He hadn't just omitted a few details. He had constructed an entirely false financial reality for me. Our entire 3-year relationship, all the talks about the future, all the shared dreams, they had all been predicated on this colossal, breathtaking deception. The package he had spoken of with such casual arrogance wasn't just a piece of luggage he was carrying. It was a ticking time bomb, and he had fully intended to let me walk into our marriage and right into the blast radius without a single word of warning. He wasn't just careless, he was deceitful. The man I loved didn't exist. He was a character Caleb had created, and the real man was a stranger who had been lying to my face for years. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave of sorrow and rage. I sat there in the quiet of my condo, the glow of the spreadsheet illuminating my face, and I finally understood. The problem wasn't the debt. The problem was the trust, and it had just been obliterated. The 24 hours after the discovery were a waking nightmare. I didn't sleep. I just sat on my couch wrapped in a blanket as the sun went down and then came up again. When Caleb came home late from his networking event, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't speak to him. The sound of his voice, once a comfort, now felt like sandpaper on my raw nerves. He was a stranger living in my home. Every time he spoke, I was mentally fact-checking him. When he said he was tired from talking business, I pictured him at an expensive bar buying a round of drinks on a credit card that was bleeding interest. When he kissed me goodbye in the morning before heading back to his own apartment, I had to physically restrain myself from wiping my cheek. The intimacy felt like a violation. My heart was broken. A deep, cavernous grief had opened up inside me. I was mourning the loss of the man I was supposed to marry, the future I thought we were building. But beneath the grief, something else was beginning to crystallize, a cold, hard anger. And beneath that anger, my analyst brain was booting up, clearing away the emotional fog and demanding a plan of action. Crying wouldn't fix this. An emotional confrontation wouldn't fix this. Yelling and screaming would only allow him to twist the narrative, to paint me as hysterical, to make this about my feelings instead of his actions. He had turned our relationship into a transaction with his package comment. He had hidden material facts during the negotiation. This was no longer a matter of the heart, it was a matter of contract law. On Friday morning, I called my office and took a personal day. I didn't go for a walk or call my best friend to cry on her shoulder. I sat down at my computer, the same one where I'd uncovered the truth, and I started researching. I didn't search for couples counseling or how to deal with a partner's debt. I searched for top prenuptial agreement lawyers in the city. I needed someone sharp, discreet, and experienced. I wasn't looking for a bulldog who would tear Caleb apart. I was looking for a surgeon who could neatly and precisely sever our financial futures, protecting me from the consequences of his choices. I spent hours reading reviews, vetting websites, and making a short list. By noon, I had an appointment scheduled for the following Monday with a woman named Alina Vance. Her firm specialized in complex marital asset protection. It sounded exactly right. Walking into her polished downtown office on Monday felt surreal. The space was quiet, decorated in muted tones of gray and cream. It was a world away from the chaotic, colorful life Caleb represented. It was a world of order, rules, and consequences. I felt more at home there than I had in my own condo for the past 5 days. Alina Vance was in her 50s, with sharp eyes, a no-nonsense demeanor, and an air of calm authority. She listened without interruption as I laid out the entire story, from the day I met Caleb to the moment I saw that 6-figure number on my spreadsheet. I handed her a printed copy of the spreadsheet, a single damning page that detailed the full extent of Caleb's hidden financial life. I expected judgment or perhaps pity. I got neither. She looked at the sheet of paper, her expression unreadable, then she looked up at me. "You did the right thing by coming here," she said, her voice even. "And for what it's worth, your spreadsheet is very thorough. Most people are not this organized when they walk in my door." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of validation. I wasn't a paranoid snoop. I was an organized person facing a crisis. "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Do I just call off the wedding?" Alina leaned back in her chair. "You could," she said. "That is certainly the cleanest option, but based on what you've told me, you're not just dealing with a man who is bad with money, you're dealing with a man who is a professional deceiver. A confrontation will likely result in him gaslighting you, minimizing his actions, and trying to manipulate you into feeling guilty. He will make this about your lack of trust, not his lack of honesty. She had perfectly described the package conversation. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. There is another option, she continued, leaning forward. We draft a prenuptial agreement, not as a negotiating tool to save the marriage, but as a truth serum. A truth serum? I asked, intrigued. Exactly. We draft an agreement that is ironclad, professional, and utterly uncompromising. It will state that all premarital debts are the sole responsibility of the party who incurred them. All premarital assets remain separate. It will include clauses requiring full financial transparency on a quarterly basis, and it will stipulate that any new unagreed upon debt over a certain threshold, say, a $1,000, constitutes a breach of the agreement. It will be, in short, a document that protects you completely. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. You will present this to him. You will not yell, you will not cry. You will simply state that it is a non-negotiable condition of the marriage. His reaction will tell you everything you need to know. If he is truly sorry, if he is truly committed to changing and being an honest partner, he will be humbled, he will be embarrassed, but he will sign it. If, however, he is the man I suspect he is, a man who believes he is entitled to your stability to fund his lifestyle, he will become indignant, he will be outraged, he will refuse, and then you will have your final, irrefutable answer. A strange sense of calm washed over me. It was a brilliant plan, it was logical, it was methodical. It removed emotion from the equation and replaced it with a simple, binary test. It was a plan a financial analyst could understand. It was a way to reclaim control of a situation that had made me feel utterly powerless. Yes, I said, my voice firm and clear. That's what we'll do. Let's draft the truth serum. For the next 2 weeks, I worked with Alina and her team. We went over every line, every clause. The document they produced was a masterpiece of legal precision. It was fair, it was clear, and it was unbreachable. It was a fortress, and I was giving Caleb the key. All he had to do was turn it and walk inside to a future with me. But the fortress came with rules, the very rules he had spent his entire life avoiding: honesty, accountability, and transparency. During those 2 weeks, I had to live a double life. I went to cake tastings with Caleb, I discussed floral arrangements with his mother, I smiled and nodded and played the part of the happy, excited bride-to-be. All the while, the thick, legally bound document that would decide our fate sat in my briefcase. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Each fake smile felt like a betrayal of my own self-respect, but I knew I had to see the plan through to its conclusion. I was no longer just Laura, the fiancée. I was Laura, the analyst, waiting for the final piece of data before making my recommendation. And the recommendation, I suspected, would be to liquidate the asset immediately. The 2 weeks it took for Alina's office to finalize the prenuptial agreement were the longest of my life. Living with the secret was a constant heavy weight. I felt like an actor in a play, going through the motions of a life that no longer felt real. Caleb, blissfully unaware, was in high spirits. With the venue booked and the major decisions seemingly made, he was back to his charming, carefree self. He saw the finish line, a beautiful wedding, and he assumed access to a more stable financial future. His cheerfulness was grotesque. He would talk excitedly about the honeymoon, suggesting lavish destinations that made my stomach clench. Maybe Bali or a tour of Italy, he'd say, already scrolling through pictures on his phone. I would just nod and murmur, we can look into it, knowing full well that our future travel plans would be dictated not by glossy photos, but by the cold, hard clauses of a legal document he hadn't yet seen. Every day I felt my resolve hardening. My grief was slowly being calcified into a kind of grim determination. This was no longer just about protecting myself, it was about honoring myself. It was about refusing to be a silent, complicit partner in a financial fantasy. The Laura he fell in love with, the stable, responsible, forgiving woman, was gone. In her place was a woman who demanded receipts. The call from Alina came on a Tuesday afternoon. It's ready, Laura. You can come pick it up whenever you like. That evening, I left work and took a taxi to her office. She handed me a thick navy blue folder. It felt impossibly heavy, like it contained the entire weight of my future. Inside was the prenuptial agreement, beautifully printed and bound, with little yellow sticky tabs marking the places for our signatures. It looked so professional, so official, so final. Remember the plan? Alina said, her gaze steady and reassuring. No emotion, no accusations, just a simple statement of fact. This is a condition for the marriage to proceed. Let him be the one to react. I clutched the folder to my chest all the way home. This was it, the truth serum. I decided to wait until the next evening, a Wednesday. It was a neutral day of the week with no special plans. I wanted the setting to be as calm and mundane as possible. Caleb was coming over after work, and I cooked one of his favorite meals, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. It felt manipulative, like I was fattening up a calf for slaughter, and a wave of self-disgust washed over me. But I pushed it down. I had to see this through. A little roast chicken was nothing compared to the scale of his deception. So we ate then. Making small talk about our respective days. He talked about a frustrating client. I talked about a boring meeting. It was a parody of domestic life. All I could think about was the blue folder sitting on my desk in the spare bedroom. After we finished eating and cleared the plates, I asked him to sit down on the sofa. I need to talk to you about something important, I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. All the emotion had been drained out of me over the past few weeks, leaving only a cold, quiet resolve. He sat, a slightly bemused look on his face. Okay, you look serious. Did I forget to take out the recycling again? He joked. I didn't smile. I walked to the spare room, retrieved the folder, and came back. I sat in the armchair opposite him, placing the folder on the coffee table between us. The space felt like a demilitarized zone. He eyed the folder. What's that? Did your work send you home with more homework? It's for us, I said calmly. I slid the folder across the table toward him. It's a prenuptial agreement. The words just hung there. Caleb stared at the folder, then at me. His brain seemed to be buffering, unable to process what I had just said. He blinked a few times, a confused frown forming. Hey, what a prenup? Is this a joke? He asked, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. No, Caleb, it's not a joke, I said, my tone unwavering. I've had it drawn up by a lawyer. I need you to read it and sign it before we can get married. It's a non-negotiable condition. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of pure, slack-jawed disbelief. He slowly reached out and opened the folder. His eyes, wide with shock, began to skim the first page. I watched his face as he took in the dense legal text. I could see the exact moment the implications began to dawn on him. His complexion, normally warm and olive-toned, turned pale and pasty. He flipped through the pages, his movements becoming more frantic. He wasn't reading every word, just scanning for the key phrases I knew were in there. Separate and sole responsibility for all premarital debts, full disclosure of all financial accounts, limitations on incurring new debt. He looked up at me, and the confusion had now curdled into something else. It was a look of deep, profound betrayal, which was so ironic it would have been laughable in any other context. You went to a lawyer, he whispered, as if I had just confessed to a terrible crime. Behind my back, you had this thing drawn up. Yes, I said, just the one word. I remembered Alina's advice, no emotion, let him react. He slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed in the quiet room. I don't understand. Why, Laura, why would you do this? Don't you trust me? The question was so perfectly, predictably what Alina had said it would be, that I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie where I already knew the script. This document is about clarity and transparency, Caleb, I said, my voice as level as a balance sheet. It's about making sure we start our marriage on a foundation of complete honesty. Everything is laid out in there, our assets, our liabilities. It protects both of us. Protects me, he scoffed, his voice gaining volume. His shock was rapidly turning into anger. It looks like it protects you. It looks like you're treating me like some kind of threat, like a business risk you need to mitigate. He had hit the nail on the head, but I didn't let my expression change. He stood up and started pacing the small space in front of the sofa. After 3 years, after everything, you think so little of me that you need a legal document to protect yourself from me? We're supposed to be building a life together, A partnership? What happened to for richer, for poorer? The fuse had been lit, the calm before the storm was officially over. Now I just had to wait for the explosion. It was coming. I could see it building in his eyes, in the clenching of his fists. The truth serum was beginning to work. Caleb's anger filled the room, a palpable, vibrating force. He paced back and forth like a caged animal, the blue folder lying on the coffee table like an unexploded bomb. His face was flushed, and his eyes, which I had once found so warm and captivating, were now narrowed slits of fury and accusation. A lawyer, Laura, you sat down with a stranger and discussed our private life, our future. How could you? He demanded, stopping his pacing to point an accusatory finger at me. Marriage is about trust. This, he said, kicking the leg of the coffee table, this is the opposite of trust. This is an insult. I remained seated, my hands folded calmly in my lap. My heart was hammering, but my exterior was a mask of placid control. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. I would not let him provoke me into an emotional outburst. I would not let him make this about my supposed lack of faith. I would make it about his demonstrable lack of honesty. You think this is what I want? He continued, his voice thick with outrage. To have my fiancée, the woman I'm supposed to spend my life with, hand me a legal document as if I'm some sort of hostile entity? You're a financial analyst, I get it, but you can't put our love on a spreadsheet. You can't quantify what we have and hedge against it. He was throwing every accusation he could think of at me, trying to find the one that would break my composure. He was painting me as a cold, calculating corporate shark who was incapable of genuine love. It was a masterful performance of a man deeply wronged. He finally ran out of steam, breathing heavily as he stared at me, waiting for my defense, for my tears, for my apology. He got none of it. I took a slow, deep breath. You're right about one thing, Caleb, I began, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Marriage is about trust. You are absolutely correct. I let that statement hang in the air for a moment. He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Perhaps he thought I was about to concede, to snatch the folder off the table and tear it to shreds. And trust, I continued, leaning forward slightly, is built on a foundation of honesty. Complete honesty. It doesn't work if one person is building on solid ground and the other is building on a sinkhole. His expression hardened again. What is that supposed to mean? This was it, the moment of truth. I was done being quiet. I was done letting him control the narrative. It was time to show him my work. It means my trust in you was broken, Caleb, I said, my voice still level, but now with an edge of steel. It wasn't broken by this document. This document is just the result. It was broken the night you looked me in the eye and told me your debt was part of the package. I stood up and walked over to the bookshelf. From behind a row of finance textbooks, I pulled out another folder. This one was plain manila. I walked back to the coffee table and laid it down next to the blue one. You asked me if I trust you, I said, my eyes locked on his. The answer is no, I don't, and this is why. I opened the folder. Inside were the printed copies of his credit card statements, the personal loan agreements, and my own spreadsheet, the one that summarized the entire horrifying picture. I took out the summary sheet and held it out for him. You told me you had $40,000 in student loans. I knew about that. I accepted that. I was ready to make a plan to pay that off with you as a team, I said, my voice starting to tremble slightly with a tightly controlled rage. What you failed to mention was the other $59,000, the 5 credit cards you've maxed out, the 2 personal loans you took out while we were planning our wedding, the delinquency notices, the lies. I tossed the paper onto the coffee table. It landed face up. The final number, $98,900, was staring up at him. Caleb stared at the paper, his face draining of all color. The righteous indignation evaporated, replaced by the panicked look of a man who had just been caught. He was speechless. All the fight went out of him in a single, silent whoosh. Where did you get this? He stammered, looking from the paper to me, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. Does it matter? I shot back. Is it wrong? Is there a single number on that page that isn't accurate? He couldn't answer, he just stared at the evidence of his own deception. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence was his confession. So don't you dare talk to me about trust, I said, my voice low and fierce. Don't you dare accuse me of being unromantic or turning our love into a business transaction. You did that. You did that every time you took me out to a nice dinner and paid with a credit card that was past due. You did it every time you bought a new gadget we couldn't afford. You did it when you let me believe your package was a manageable backpack, when in reality it was a mountain of debt you had every intention of letting me help you carry without my knowledge or consent. He finally looked up at me, his expression a pathetic mix of shame and defiance. I was going to tell you, he mumbled. After the wedding, I didn't want to worry you. The excuse was so feeble, so transparently self-serving that I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Worry me? You weren't protecting me, Caleb. You were protecting yourself. You knew that if I saw the real numbers, I wouldn't marry you. It was a calculated business decision on your part. I pointed to the blue folder. This prenup isn't an insult to our love. It's the only possible path forward. It's a chance to wipe the slate clean and start over with total honesty. It makes you responsible for the choices you made before me, and it makes us both responsible for the choices we make together from this day forward. It is the very definition of fairness. I stood there, my heart pounding, waiting for his response. This was the final test. Elinor's words echoed in my head. If he is truly sorry, he will be humbled, he will sign. Caleb looked from my face to the damning spreadsheet to the elegant blue folder that contained his one and only chance. He stared at it for a long, silent minute. Then he shook his head slowly. I can't sign this, Laura, he said, his voice quiet and sullen. It's demeaning. And there it was, the final piece of data. He wasn't humbled, he was offended. He wasn't sorry for lying, he was angry that he got caught. He didn't see the prenup as a tool for rebuilding trust. He saw it as a punishment, as an insult to his character, a character he had just proven he didn't possess. I nodded slowly, a profound and painful sadness washing over me, but it was mixed with the clean, sharp clarity of absolute certainty. I see, I said. Your refusal to sign tells me everything I need to know. You're not insulted by the prenup, Caleb. You're insulted that your plan didn't work. The conversation was over, the relationship was over, everything was over. The silence that followed my final statement was different. It wasn't tense or angry anymore, it was hollow. It was the silence of an empty space, the silence of an ended thing, we both knew it. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to argue about. The truth, in all its ugly and unvarnished detail, was finally out, and it had consumed everything. Caleb sank onto the sofa, looking small and defeated. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the two folders on the coffee table, the blue one representing a future he had just rejected, and the manila one representing the past he couldn't escape. So that's it then, he asked, his voice barely audible. It's over. Yes, I said. The word was small, but it felt monumental. It's over. I didn't feel a triumphant surge of victory. I just felt tired and incredibly deeply sad. I had loved this man, or at least the man I thought he was, and dismantling the life we had planned together piece by piece was an agony I wouldn't wish on anyone. The days that followed were a painful blur of logistics. Canceling the venue was the first, most difficult call. The woman on the phone was sympathetic, but she reminded me that our 5-figure deposit was, of course, non-refundable. I just sighed and said I understood. It was a costly lesson, but infinitely cheaper than the price of marrying Caleb. Then came the caterer, the photographer, the florist. With each call, I felt another thread of our imagined future snapping. The hardest part was telling our families. My parents were shocked but supportive. They had always found Caleb charming, but my father, a retired accountant, had privately expressed reservations about his financial creativity. When I told him the full story, all he said was, "I'm proud of you for protecting yourself, Laura. That took courage." Telling Caleb's parents was his job, but I'm sure the version he told them painted him as the victim of a cold, untrusting fiancé. I imagined I was now the villain in their family's story, and I found that I didn't care. Caleb moved the last of his things out of my condo that weekend. He was quiet and sullen, avoiding my eyes. There were no tearful goodbyes, no dramatic final words. We were like two business partners dissolving a failed venture, silently dividing up the assets. He took his clothes, his design books, his expensive electronics. I was left with the silence, the paid-for wedding invitations that would never be sent, and a profound sense of relief that was mingled with grief. In the weeks and months that followed, the sadness slowly began to fade, replaced by a quiet period of reflection. I replayed our entire relationship in my head, but this time with the clear-eyed perspective of hindsight. The red flags, which I had once so willingly explained away as charming quirks, now seemed like giant, waving banners of warning. His live-in-the-moment attitude wasn't romantic spontaneity, it was a reckless disregard for the future. His "you have to spend money to make money" philosophy wasn't an investment strategy, it was a justification for impulsive spending. His charm, his easygoing nature, I realized now that it was all part of the package. It was the attractive wrapping designed to distract from the faulty product inside. I had fallen for a projection, an idea of a man, and I had been so in love with that idea that I ignored the data that contradicted it. My greatest strength, my analytical mind, was something I had willingly shut down in my personal life. I had wanted to believe in the fairy tale, and in doing so, I had almost signed up for a nightmare. The experience changed me. I am still a planner, still a financial analyst who believes in the power of a good spreadsheet, but I've learned that the most important balance sheet is the one that measures a person's character. The most valuable asset is trust, and the most dangerous liability is deception. It's been 6 months now. The gaping hole left by Caleb's departure has healed over, leaving a scar that reminds me of the lesson I learned. My condo is quiet, orderly, and peaceful. My finances are secure. My future, which briefly veered toward a cliff edge, is now back on a solid, predictable path of my own making. I feel stronger, I feel wiser. And though I am alone, I am not lonely. I have my own back. I learned how to be my own protector, my own advocate. I hired a lawyer to discuss a package, and in the end, I was the one who refused to accept the terms. I chose to invest in myself, and I know with the certainty of a perfectly balanced equation that it was the best decision I ever made. And now I want to turn it over to you. Am I the bad guy for how I handled this, or did I dodge a bullet?